Welcome everybody to our presentation titled Cultural and Creative Industries and Knowledge Production, Specificities in the Atlantic Area and Suggestion of a Transfer Model from Public Research to SME. My name is Rodrigo Almeida. I am a researcher at ISCTE, who is a member of the 4H Create Consortium, and I have been collaborating with the 4H Create project for the last 2 years. Today I will be presenting the work, and Ana Rita Cruz, who has been coordinating the project on ISCTE's part, will be present during the 4H Create Capitalisation webinar. More information on that in the description below. In the meantime, if you have any question, please feel free to write us at either of our emails. So today we will be speaking about knowledge transfer, which some of you may know as transfer of technology, in the context of the cultural and creative industries. We will be speaking a bit about the context of the work, the main concepts that are relevant to understand the cultural and creative activities, or CCA for short, the different contexts found in the Atlantic area, both in statistical terms and in terms of policies developed to address these issues, and we will be looking at the perspectives of actors of these various regions, as well as presenting the main results of the model proposed for knowledge transfer in each of the specific regions. The contents of this presentation are taken from the homonymous report, which you can find online at 4h/create.eu. And if you are interested, please check the full version where we go into much more detail, specifically in the statistical and policy analysis. The context of this presentation is the 4H Create project, which is an Interreg project that sought to promote a quadruple helix approach for 7 regions of the Atlantic area, namely the Lisbon Metropolitan Area, or LMA, in Portugal, Andalusia and Principado de Asturias in Spain, Bretagne and Pays de la Loire in France, and Southern and Eastern Ireland and Southwestern Scotland. In the context of the project, our goal was to look at the ways in which knowledge can be transferred in and out of the CCA towards promoting their innovation, capitalization of resources, and cooperation. Specifically, we tried to look at the relationship between universities, or higher education institutions, HEI for short, and the CCA, how this is currently being implemented on a political and strategic level, and different ways for which such relationships can be improved. Towards that end, however, it's important to take into account 2 aspects. First, the CCA comprises a very different set of activities and industries from other well-studied economic sectors, and thus the tools for knowledge transfer developed should take that into account. Secondly, the regions we are dealing with are quite different from each other, and those regional differences and path dependencies must be factored in. First of all, what is specific about the CCA? Well, compared to other economic sectors, CCA organizations are in general smaller. They are much more guided by informal and precarious arrangements. Moreover, they often lack well-organized associative tissues that make bridges with larger organizations easy. Secondly, the very definition of CCA is a complex topic, since they comprise a diversity of subsectors, which translates into a lot of distinctions when it comes to motivations. Sectors such as orchestras and theaters may have some organizations more focused on social welfare than profits, and others such as visual artists and designers may place more emphasis on the aesthetic value. This means that just considering the economic value is not enough when we look at them. And finally, on the point that we are most going to talk about today, the majority of CCA have few, if any, relationships with higher education institutions, regardless of whether those relationships are mediated or individual. Taking this into account and the fact that these activities use very different forms of knowledge, we need a broad notion of knowledge transfer. This means we need to focus beyond the classical notion of transfer of technology, which is what you may associate with knowledge transfer simpliciter, and which deals with the production of patents, designs, and so on. Namely, we also include in the notion of knowledge transfer, knowledge translation, which focuses on decoding and encoding of knowledge, diffusion processes, amongst other such activities, as well as knowledge valuation and collaboration practices, which have to do with the creation of spin-offs, incubation, and other such forms. On the other hand, the regions we are dealing with are from the start very different from each other. We won't get into much of the details of the characterization here. So you can find the analysis in the report, but an important point is that we can look at three different realities based on the data: innovation patterns, employment and unemployment tendencies, and the evolution of the CCA in the 7 regions. These 3 clusters were based on the statistical analysis and comprise a set of Iberian regions, a set of French regions, and a Scottish and Irish regions, which amongst themselves have some shared levels of development and some path dependencies. These regional differences are particularly relevant when we think about the policy commitments to the CCA and to the relationship between CCA and HEI. We looked at 55 documents from these regions and found that the policy commitments made by each of the regions and the overall discourse that there is about the CCA, as well as what has actually been implemented and what is visible from scientific articles, technical reports, and such, roughly matches what the 3 clusters we found above. Namely, the Iberian regions share the difficulty in accessing statistical information, showed a lower level of professionalization and commitment, and an excessive importance given to spillover effects from key subsectors, despite having overall a strong commitment to the CCA. The French regions had an overall reliance on traditional cultural sectors and a lack of well-established institutional management authorities, and had a strong associative tissue which roughly compensated many of these tendencies. As for the Scottish and Irish regions, which had a much longer history of engagement with the CCA, these had a well-organized management policy but still faced difficulties in generating entrepreneurial spirit and in engaging final users. Moreover, this analysis allowed us to specify some subsectors as more relevant to some regions than others, which is something we will come back to at the end. In order to have a clearer picture of how these realities affect the CCA in each of the regions, as well as within subsectors, we inquired actors in each of the partner regions as to their main forms of knowledge transfer, collaboration, evaluation, and so on. The results we got emphasized that actors tended to engage with HEI mostly in collaboration and in participation in sector-specific meetings, namely in the Iberian regions. In this, Andalusia also stands out as having a substantial level of contribution for training courses. In Pays de la Loire, CCA had stronger engagements in terms of incubation and workshop participation, but overall the engagement with HEI was low when it came to sharing human resources and in producing patents and designs. As for the main weaknesses felt by actors, overall regions noted the lack of investment in joint projects, especially in Andalusia and Asturias, and an overall lack of understanding of the results of research produced by the HEI, as well as a lack of hosting spaces, both of which are more specific to the Lisbon metropolitan area. Contrary to other regions, actors in Pays de la Loire had special concern with the professionalization of students and the difficulties of establishing connections towards that end with HEI. Now, this paints a picture, but it's also important to understand what goes on in terms of the specific subsectors. And we could see by looking at the subsectors that the actors came from that some of them had a much closer connection to HEI, namely those related to design, video game, audio and cinema, as well as performance arts and writing in different ways. In terms of the specific ways this tended to develop, the development of collaborative projects and participation in subsector meetings tended to be the dominant forms of engagement. A much smaller percentage engage in sharing of human resources, contribution to training courses, or production of patents and designs. Finally, looking at the way different actors from distinct subsectors perceived the main difficulties in engaging with HEI, we especially note that fine arts and crafts placed a higher emphasis on the lack of investment in joint projects, while sectors such as performance arts, writing and publishing, or various forms of design, noted difficulties in understanding results produced by the HEI. Putting all of this together, we came up with 3 main lines of intervention that can plausibly be taken to increase the engagement of HEI in relation to promoting knowledge transfer and valuation with the CCA. These are direct promotion of entrepreneurship and transfer of knowledge, the sharing of knowledge among subsectors and the fostering of that within the HEI, and the creation of opportunities for the CCA. These lines should not be understood as policy guidelines, but more as general lines of engagement from which policy lines can be taken when we attend to the specificities of each individual region. Briefly going through these, the first line of intervention concerns the promotion of entrepreneurship and direct transfer of knowledge. With this we mean a more immediate form of knowledge transfer that tries to bring the different forms of knowledge produced by HEI, be them entrepreneurial or aesthetic, symbolic knowledge, to the CCA. And this also concerns the production of knowledge directed to the needs of CCA and end users, as well as development of collaborative curricula and alternative forms of transfer of knowledge produced by the HEI themselves. By what we have just seen, such measures are well suited to the needs of all regions under study and are generally adapted to all the subsectors, since they share concerns and show lacks in public policy in all of these domains. But nevertheless, in contexts like the Iberian regions, special focus ought to be taken into engaging the HEI to be knowledge translators, whilst in regions such as those of Scotland or Ireland, the focus could be much more on the development of collaborative curricula due to the greater ease in institutional management of such engagements. Our second line of policies concerns the sharing of knowledge and essentially focuses on HEI taking on the role of a mediator. Now, this can happen through engaging with informal associations, with technopoles or clusters, and it targets the need to create greater subsector unity and a stronger associative tissue. It also concerns an area that the results indicate has been relatively unexplored, which is the interchange of human resources between HEI and the CCA. The latter can be especially bolstered in regions such as France due to the existence of associative tissue which can mediate those engagements. In regions such as Portugal, Asturias, or Ireland, the role of HEI in these respects is possibly better suited to mediation through engagement with sectors such as video, audio, and the various forms of design which we mentioned. Finally, our third line of approach concerns the creation of opportunities for the CCA, whether supporting spin-offs, research into their operation, the use of online communities, or the incentivizing of professionalization of teaching in areas close to the CCA. This is the freest line of intervention and is the one we see as having been less studied and less developed amongst all of the ones we have been proposing. In particular, in regions like those of Scotland and Ireland, which have begun to take a path towards professionalization, it could be useful to create more specific programs and incentives that actually targeted the way in which students can be brought to companies and vice versa. In regions such as Bretagne and Pays de la Loire, the latter of which had actors which noted the greater lack of professionalization in students compared to the other regions under study, this option could be especially interesting, namely in the more digitally engaged sectors, in order to counteract the overdependency of traditional cultural sectors. In all of the regions, these actions are by far the ones that offer the greatest degree of freedom in engaging with the more social and cultural dimensions of the CCA, which are vital to promote healthy knowledge transfer practices, and which we note were pretty much absent from the reports and the studies we analyzed. So summing up our work, our goal was to understand what has been done in terms of promoting knowledge transfer and valuation between CCA and HEI in the 7 regions under study. Towards that end, we had to understand the specificities of the CCA and to understand the statistical, political, and strategic conditions of the regions. We note that despite their variations, overall the public policies tended to neglect the social and cultural dimensions of the CCA, which come with a multiple helix approach and which are vital for their development, as we were just noting. Likewise, they often recognized but did not address the need to have university engage in a more flexible way with these actors. This was noted in the perceptions of the actors and led us to produce some general lines of engagement to counteract the still limited involvement of HCI and their resources in knowledge production with CCA. This is especially relevant given the manifest interest by the latter in becoming more entrepreneurially engaged and to have stronger relationships with HCI. So I hope you found that interesting. As I said before, if you have any questions or comments, Ana Rita Cruz will be available at the 4H Create Capitalisation webinar. The details are available in the description below. Thank you very much for your attention.